to start with the actual program, I want to introduce you into the surveillance of nosocomial of hospital-acquired infection, what this is and why you should even be doing this, and why I think it is important for every hospital or every neonatology department caring for high-risk babies to take part in some sort of surveillance. But I will try to show you why I think so. I'm interested in how you judge your performance regarding hospital-acquired infections in the NICU. So yeah, gut feeling. Nobody has a gut feeling. That's great already. Clinicians typically have an eye on infection during ward rounds. This is very common and also a good practice, I would consider. I get notified if unusual events like outbreaks occur. This is, for instance, true for me too. So if somebody realizes something is unusual on our wards, they tend to notify me. We also have statistics on the occurrence of multi-drug resistant bacteria, as most people do. And then the question, I'm continuously measuring infection rates using harmonized methods, watch their trends over time and compare them to an objective standard that is comparable with respect to the NICU's case mix. And this is obviously the thing that I'm about. This is surveillance. So surveillance is about continuously measuring infection rates using harmonized methods so that you can actually compare things, and you watch the trend both over time so that you can see if something changes in your ward and try to compare them to other wards or to an objective standard that is actually comparable with respect to the case mix. So how do we actually know how many infections we should expect in our NICU, and why it is complicated to measure and not compare apples and pears, and how we can set our expectations regarding infection rates. So this is, I like hiking in the mountains, but this is not a scheme of a mountain, but this is a 3D graph of the infection risk of preterm infants adjusted by the day of life in this direction and the birth weight in this direction. This data comes from NeoIPC, so the German surveillance system for preterm infants with a birth weight of less than 1,500 grams. In Germany, we have around 200, a little more than 200 NICUs participating in the system. So this is quite good data that we have. And as you see, there's an increase of the infection risk. The lighter the baby is, the higher the infection risk is. This is in this direction. And then there's also a decrease in infection risk after time. So there's the maximum infection risk of is around maybe, let's say, day 7 to 10. And then obviously the risk, the over the time the infant grows, the risk decreases. This is very stable for the borderline very low birth weight infants, and is less stable for the very light infants, very extremely low birth weight infants. This has two reasons. A, these are very special infants, and B, there's also less data in this part of the graph, because obviously there's not too many infants of 300 grams, especially infants of 300 grams surviving up to day 80. So there's also death occurring in this population. So this is just to give you an idea how infection risk is spread, and that you cannot just flatten this and say, oh, there's so many infants in my ward and I expect this or that infection risk, because it highly depends on the birth weight composition of the infants you have on your ward. And it also depends on the days of life they spend on your ward. So if you are a high care center who moves infants to closer to home after initial stabilization, you get this chunk of data. And if you are the opposite, a low care or intermediate care NICU that gets infants referred back after initial stabilization, you may end up in this part of the graph and not see the high infection risk in the beginning of care. So the odds, this is another view on this data, the odds of acquiring an infection just accumulates over time, but it is not linear, but it has a higher part in the beginning and then it flattens out and saturates in the end. So measuring infections in neonates is complicated. And then we have the fact that even if you standardize for all this, so if you standardize for the different risks of the infants, you still have different infection risks. And this might be attributable, at least in part, to infection prevention and control practices. So as we know, we strive and struggle to have as good infection prevention and control as possible in our wards, but we don't have an idea what is even possible, or if we are performing as well as we think, or as well as others do. And this is the standardized infection rate. So the standardized infection rate is a very simple measure that we have in the NeoIPC system, but it initially stems from the NeoKISS again. And it is according to the reference data, so the days of life and the birth weight composition, we calculate how many infections we would expect for a ward, and then we see how many we actually observe. And then we do a division, the number of observed infections divided by the number of expected infections. This leads to the fact that if we have the same number of observed and expected, we have a standardized infection rate of 1. If we observe more than infections than we expected, then we have a number greater than 1. And if we have less, observe less than we expected, the number is less than 1. So the line here, the number 1 is the wards that have the number of infections as we would expect, and each of the vertical lines is 1 ward, and it is the confidence interval around the data. So this is the 95% confidence interval of the ward's infection rate. And as you see, some of them have very low SIR numbers. Some of them are on the one side, and some are even significant outlier. And this may still be attributable to case mix and the like, but at least it is already standardized for the day of life and the birth weight of the infants. So why do all this complicated stuff and measure these infections? What does it actually give me? So there's the Hawthorne effect, what we call also call the surveillance effect. What you see here is the incidence density of bloodstream infection in the NeoKISS system over the first 3 years of participation. So this is the first year, the second year, and the third year of the population of NICUs that were participating in the NeoKISS system. This is was published in 2007. And as you see, we have a significant decrease of the incidence density over the first 3 years of participation. And this surveillance effect is, how could it work? We think it is Hawthorne effect. So the moment you start observing numbers, people are aware of it, and people start to act differently because they know they try to improve. They know that these numbers are observed, and there's a lot of things that you can do that we can't even know as a surveillance system. But typically, especially high outliers start thinking about how they can potentially optimize their infection control practices, and this leads to the surveillance effect. So this is not directly attributable to surveillance, but rather indirectly because of maybe hundreds of little interventions of people who are now aware that they might be outliers. Another aspect of surveillance is that you can sometimes observe interventions. This is probiotics before after time series analysis we did, published in 2016 by Luisa Denkel, where at some points this is nothing we actually did. So we did not plan an intervention trial or the like, but rather we observed that at some point German NICU started giving probiotics to their infants, and we just did a poll and asked the participants in the NeoIPC system, do you routinely give probiotics to your patients? If yes, what do you administer, and when did you start? And then we took the start date of all the wards and overlapped them and looked at the half years before and after, and by this, we could do this interrupted time series analysis on how the incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis in the extremely low birth weight infant population. The same is more or less true also for the very low birth weight. So for the less than 1,500 grams, but this is the less than 1,000 gram infants. Then we could just observe the incidence of necrotizing enterocolitis over this time. So from a surveillance system, or even from a ward surveillance, you can also observe your interventions without, even if they are these interventions happen without being in a formal trial. So and you can also, like as a highest level of thing, you can also plan intervention trials within a surveillance system, and this is an intervention trial we did. We organized where we implemented an evidence-based bundle of bloodstream infections. This was the period after Pronovost, when infection prevention control bundles were the newest, hottest thing. And then we implemented a bundle for bloodstream infections, and then observed the CVC, central line associated, the peripheral vascular catheter associated, and the not vascular catheter associated bloodstream infections over time. So with when being part of a surveillance system, you can also take part in an intervention trial, and the data collection for the infection outcomes more or less happens on the side, because it is already part of the surveillance you are performing on a routine base. This is an advantage we also do for the NeoDeco study, by the way. So the infectious outcomes for the NeoDeco study will come from the NeoIPC surveillance. Other than this, the two systems are not really tied together or depend on each other. So who does the work? Who does the surveillance data collection typically? In Germany, we have a lot of NICU doctors actually doing data collection, but also NICU nurses, also IPC linked doctors. So this is also a NICU doctor, but a link to the IPC team, an IPC nurse. So this is dedicated staff, at least in Germany, who have IPC on as a routine job, and the same is true for IPC doctors. So this is typically, as I am a hygiene in Germany doctor, or a microbiologist, sorry, who does infection control as a main job. So this is the distribution in Germany from 2 polls we did quite a while ago. We could redo this at some point, probably because the data are not very recent, but this is how it works in Germany. Now, how does the surveillance fit into the NeoIPC project? We have, as you probably, if you are interacting with the NeoIPC project on a routine basis, you probably have already some understanding of how things fit together. But we have the clinical practice network, which is very open, where you have no attached strings, where you can just subscribe and get part of the newsletter and get the news and interact with us and maybe others. And then we have the surveillance system, where you can start collecting data about hospital-acquired infections and see how you are performing. And then on top of all this, there's the NeoDeco trial, which is an intervention trial, which relies for the infectious outcomes on participating on the surveillance system. So these are the 3 levels of involvement in the NeoIPC system as it currently works.